Well, this Torah portion is Cantor Sibo's favorite for quite obvious reasons. It's an extremely poignant portion. And one of the things we might learn from this is that, and this happens often, that though the Torah right here is dealing with what we might call a world historical story, after all, the whole story of Joseph and his brothers on one level deals with the traumas, we might say, of getting the family, Jacob's family, from Canaan to Egypt, where they are thriving at the end of this story. The story also deals with the large issue of sibling rivalry, and it seems to me solves it. But what is more poignant about this story is the way in which Joseph breaks down and sobs. The Torah says the following, as Cantor Sibo just recently sang. He could no longer control himself. His sobs were so loud that the Egyptians could hear them. When he asks rhetorically, "I am Joseph, is my father still well?" And this gives us cause to wonder, what is it that caused such a convulsion of tears in Joseph? What causes him to break down? What causes him, as the Torah says, to lose control over yourself? Surely the answer can be found in what immediately precedes Joseph's breaking down. And that is the speech of Judah, the lead son, to Joseph. And I want to read what I consider to be the significant verses as the foreground, the prelude to Joseph's losing control. From chapter 44, the chapter right before where Cantor Sibo began to chant, verse 28. As you know, Judah quotes their father Jacob, my wife bore me 2 sons, but one is gone from me. This is Judah now bringing the message from Jacob, who is still back in Canaan. But one is gone from me, and I said, alas, he has been torn by a beast, and I have not seen him since. If you take this other one from me, he thinks, in other words, that Joseph is dead, and that now there is going to be Benjamin, Rachel's other son, to be held hostage while the brothers can return to Canaan. If, Judah is now quoting Jacob, you take this other one from me too, and he meets with disaster, you will send my white hair down to Sheol in sorrow. Now if I come to your servant, Judah now speaking to Joseph, about his father, if I come to your servant my father, and the boy is not with us when we return, since Jacob's life is so bound up in the life of Benjamin, when he sees that the boy is not with us, he will die, and your servants will send the white head of your servant our father down to Sheol in grief. This seems to me to be the pivotal moment at which and after which Joseph breaks down. What do we find in these few verses? First of all, that Judah is no longer a kidnapper. He is now appealing to his brother Joseph, and he is no longer willing to sell or to leave one of his brothers behind as he did many years before. What he exhibits here, and what it seems to me causes the breakdown, is this genuine, authentic, unpremeditated expression of care and concern for his father. for his father's well-being. And as he says, v'nafsho kashura v'nafsho, seeing that his own life, my father's own life, is bound together with that of his son. In other words, to be bound together with another person is to think of that person as another self. And when Joseph experiences this emotional expression of fidelity, this expression of self-transcendence, where Jacob is thinking about his father and not himself. And more than that, thinking about the father for whom he, Judah, is not one of the favored children. And this overwhelms Joseph, and he could not go on. What I want to do at this point is to look at two poems which express the depth and significance of the care of one human being for another. These are two poems that I love with all my heart. And before I read the first poem, I want to say something about what the poet T.S. Eliot said about what he wants from poetry. What I look for in a writer, T.S. Eliot said, is some direct shock of poetic intensity. Some shock of poetic intensity, an intensity that refuses to die down. That expresses precisely what I feel about that moment in each of these two poems. That continues to vibrate within me, and perhaps you will feel it too. The first poem is by the poet Robert Hayden, and the title is Those Winter Sundays. Perhaps some of you know it. Sundays, too, my father got up early and put his clothes on in the blue-black cold. Then with cracked hands that ached from labor in the weekday weather, made banked fires blaze. No one ever thanked him. I'd wake and hear the cold splintering, breaking. When the rooms were warm, he'd call, and slowly I would rise and dress, fearing the chronic angers of that house. Speaking indifferently to him, who had driven out the cold and polished my good shoes as well. What did I know? What did I know of love's austere and lonely offices? What did I know? What did I know of love's austere and lonely offices? We feel, especially with the repetition of what did I know, the intensity of this question and how it sears itself into the soul of the poet. The feeling of regret that he didn't recognize his father's love, albeit an austere and lonely love for him. This is about the non-recognition of the care of his father for him. He was never able to thank his father for his care. And he recognizes, doesn't he, that he can't go back. He can't recover that moment in which he might have expressed some appreciation to his father. And the fact that the poem ends with a question mark implicates all of us in that question. What did I know? What did I know of love's austere and lonely offices? Sometimes the love and the care of one person for another, of one person for us doesn't shout itself with overt emotion. Sometimes it is austere and expresses itself through a certain kind of distance, a certain kind of loneliness, which doesn't keep it from being expressed in its own way. And this is a poet who, in this poem, could not, at his young age, recognize in the severity of his father, who, after all, was a human being with his own problems, the love which he expressed for his son, the care he expressed to his son for not waking him before the house was warm, for polishing his shoes, actions and not words of care. His father cared, but in quiet, though unmistakable, actions. Care, this poet seems to suggest, is central to relationships. To care and to be cared for. What did I know? What did I know? That care is the vital flame of relationship, expressing the blessing of relationship. Secondly, I want to read one of my very favorite poems by Ben Jonson. Ben Jonson was a contemporary of Shakespeare. He was a poet. He was a playwright. He was an author. He was a critic, a polymath, if you will, who happened to kill a fellow actor in a duel, and he was saved from capital punishment because he depended upon the clergy privilege. And that clergy privilege expressed itself in his capacity to read the Bible in Latin. The name of this poem is On My First Son, and it's a lament to his son. I'm going to read the whole thing, and then I'm going to focus on a couple of lines. Farewell, thou child of my right hand and joy. My sin was too much hope of thee, loved boy. 7 years thou wert lent to me, and I thee pay, exacted by thy fate on the just day. Oh, could I lose all father now? For why will man lament the state he should envy? To have so soon scaped worlds and flesh's rage, and if no other misery, yet age. Rest in soft peace, and asked, say, here doth lie Ben Jonson, his best piece of poetry, for whose sake henceforth all his vows be such, and what he loves may never like too much. Farewell, thou child of my right hand and joy. My sin was too much hope of thee, loved boy. 7 years thou wert lent to me, and I thee pay, exacted by thy fate on the just day. We must accept reality and the workings of nature. If a child has to die prematurely, this is part of what we might call the indifference of the natural world to human strivings. I must, he said, accept that. My sin was too much hope of thee, loved boy. 7 years wert thou lent to me, and I thee pay. I recognize that this was a loan, and I'm going to pay back, because it was exacted by fate on the just day, on the day on which it was destined to happen. I must accommodate myself to reality. And then comes one of the most poignant lines for me in all of poetry. Oh, could I lose all father now? how am I going to be able to accept the death of my son? I've tried to offer a reason, a rationale, an explanation. It's not working. I care too much. How could I stop caring so much? Only in one way. If I could stop being a father. Oh, could I lose all father now, which I can't do. Care for my son is embedded in the structure and material of my body and my soul. Father is a relational term. One is only a father, one is only a mother if one has a child. And to be a father is to be inextricably connected to that other person. Oh, could I lose all father now? When you think about T.S. Eliot's desire for a poet to offer some direct shock of poetic intensity, this is one of those lines. For why, he continues to cajole himself, will man lament the state he should envy? Premature death saves the person from all the slings and arrows of the years of a long life. For why will man lament the state he should envy? To have so soon scaped. You hear the alliteration, the S sounds, for having so soon escaped worlds and flesh's rage, and if no other misery, yet age. He's trying, in spite of himself, to adjust to this reality, but he cares much too much. The poet seems to be asserting that we cannot cease to be deeply connected to those with whom we exist in relationship, as a parent, as a child, as a sibling, as a spouse, as a friend. Connection. His soul, speaking of Jacob, was bound up with the soul of his son. Connection is crucial. Don't let caring go, these two poets seem to be asserting. Don't stop feeling embedded in, caught up in the soul of the person with whom you are in relationship. Care about them, protect them, shelter them, shield them, because this is the vital force of the lived life. Joseph was overwhelmed because he came to see in an instant of Judah's great speech how connected, how much care Judah had for his grieving father. The grieving father who was so unfair to him. Nevertheless, this was a gesture of concern that didn't require reciprocity. Care, these poems and this story suggest, is what gives life and our connections its savor, its depth, its peace, and its well-being. Robert Hayden, as a boy, didn't know this. But of course, we do. And we must continue to cherish, cultivate, preserve our relationships and all that they mean to all of us.